The guest is Dr. Baldwin from Vanderbilt University. And, of course, Dr. Baldwin, let's pick up where we left off during that first segment. And I think that you outlined about 4 areas in which you believe Dr. Martin Luther King's prayer life played a significant part in his overall ministry.
That's right.
And so let's talk about those 4 areas for our audience this morning.
First of all, to talk about prayer as the foundation of Dr. King's personal devotional life, Dr. King believed very much in private prayer. He had a life of private prayer. He would retreat to his pastor's study, and sometimes, of course, he would rent a hotel room, and he would retreat in what was called a personal prayer retreat. And he would have a self-imposed day of silence where we would actually pray and meditate and engage in a rigorous discipline of think time. So I think we have to see prayer as the foundation of his personal devotional life. The second point is that we have to see prayer as a part of his sermonic preparation and preaching. That is, before he prepared his sermons for delivery on Sunday mornings, he prayed. He prayed during the preparation of the sermons. He prayed at the beginnings of sermons, at the endings of sermons. So prayer was very much a vital part of his sermon preparation and delivery. And also, point 3, I think, is important also. Dr. King utilized prayer in his service and caring function as a pastor. That is, he frequently prayed with people, people who were sick, people who were bereaved, people who were dealing with all kinds of personal problems and family issues. He made a habit as a pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery and also at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta of praying with people. And he understood that to be one of the most important functions of a pastor. And the 4th point I've tried to make is that Dr. King employed prayer, or the discipline of prayer, I should say, as a form of creative energy. That is a way of inspiring, motivating, affirming, reaffirming, and indeed empowering people in the context of the struggle for equal rights, social justice, human dignity, and peace.
You know, in your study, I think you said you've worked some 20-odd years.
Yes.
To try to bring this book to fruition.
That's right.
Why don't you give us some steps in terms of, I mean, when did the idea first come to you, and how did it evolve within the context of you writing many, many other books as this book was evolving? Talk about it from that. Well,
I published my first article on Dr. King, I think, in 1984, and that article looked at the, really explored the cultural roots of his religion and his theology. At that particular point, I began to collect Dr. King's prayers, 1984, so that's been about 26 years now. And I started thinking more seriously about his spirituality, because I think in order to understand Dr. King as a social activist or as a civil rights leader, you have to understand his spirituality, because for him there was an intimate connection between spirituality and social transformation. That is, in order to be a social reformer, a person who brings about a transformed society around the issues of race and class and economics, one first has to have a prayer life. So the disciplines of nonviolence and prayer sort of intersected for Dr. King. You can't talk about one without talking about the other.
And so they sort of played off one against the other.
Yes.
This idea of nonviolence and prayer.
Yes.
And it was always his belief that before he engaged in almost any, and I think as you've indicated, almost any kind of activity, that he often prayed over it. And prayer was a very important thing in Dr. King's life.
Prayer was because Dr. King understood that there are accomplishments that you can make through prayer that you can't make through street demonstrations, acts of civil disobedience. He understood that. Acts of civil disobedience, street demonstrations, marches had their place in the movement. But he also understood that prayer was very, very important. And so he turned to prayer during those moments when he was pressured. And as you well know, he was always under a lot of pressure in the movement. He received 30 to 40 telephone calls a day threatening his life, his home, his family. So he needed this opportunity to engage in a kind of experiential appropriation of black faith, which means, of course, that he had to retreat to prayer as a way of dealing with these threats against his life, as a way of dealing with these pressures of the movement.
In other words, it's very little that one individual can do if you're receiving 30 threats on your life.
Exactly, 30 to 40.
You have 30 or 40 a day, and there's a higher power that that can mitigate that, and you can deal with. Yeah, I can certainly understand.
And then I might add, in saying that, prayer was not only sacred time. Prayer time for Dr. King was not only sacred time, but it was purification time. It was his way of preparing himself to lead people in the movement. And I might also add that he was influenced at that level very much by Mahatma Gandhi. If you know the history of Gandhi's movement in India, he engaged in a lot of praying and fasting because that was his mode of self-purification. And Dr. King embraced that. There were 4 steps to his nonviolent direct action campaigns. Number 1, the collection of facts to make sure that injustice existed. Secondly, attempts at negotiation. Thirdly, self-purification, which involved prayer, fasting, meditation. And fourthly, the involvement in nonviolent direct action campaigns.
And of course, Dr. Baldwin, we're getting ready for the end of this second segment. And when we come back, I want you to say something about not only his spirituality, but about the upcoming celebration, because I think that it's always important that we make some new statements in reference to how King ought to be celebrated. And I think that you've done it many, many times, and looking back over all of the archives and information we have, these are some excellent statements, but I think that many of them have to be restated.
Exactly.
Almost every year.
Exactly.
And so,
exactly.
And when we come back, we'll deal with that.
Exactly.
And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. The topic is the spiritual